employer brand is going to be as much of a kind of a growth lever and influencer as some of your marketing channels that you're using.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, I'm not just joined by one 40-Minute Mentor, but I have the great pleasure of sharing the podcast studio with some of my Amplified Group and JBM colleagues. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Lisa Crane and James Adams from our Foundation Partners Embedded Talent team, and my fellow JBMers, Zach Rose and Sophie Graci, who are going to dive into talent trends and predictions for 2026. Together, we'll be sharing our predictions for the biggest hiring trends, talking through how to scale your teams and what founders need to know to attract and retain the best people next year. From AI in recruitment to the rise of fractional talent, we'll unpack what's changing and what's here to stay. A big welcome to my wonderful Amplified colleagues. We're going to have a fantastic roundtable chat today about all things talent. And we're going to start with a quick round of introduction. So please, can you all introduce yourselves, share what you do within Amplified Group? And I'd also love to know what your favorite moment of 2025 has been.
Hi, everyone. I am a research lead and a senior associate here at JBM. I've been here for 2 years. And my highlight of 2025 has been starting to build out our brilliant associate team over here at JBM and further integrating into the awesome Amplified Group team.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm part of Amplified's Group Embedded Talent team as part of the Foundation Partners world. My favourite part of 2025 has been joining this team. So I think I'm on about week 6, 7, 8, 3, something around there. It's gone so fast, but it's been amazing.
We're very lucky to have you, Lisa, and thank you so much for joining us when you are still relatively early on into your journey here.
I lead JBM's SOS or Scale Up Operator Solution division, and we do fractional and interim placements. My highlight of the year has been coming to Europe from Australia and moving across here with my wife. Being within 1 to 2 hours of 50 or so different amazing destinations is super awesome.
And last but certainly no means least, James.
I'm the senior partner responsible for the embedded talent function within Foundation Partners, which is part of the Amplified Group. What I should say is my highlight for the year is welcoming my son into the world. What it actually is when Terence Crawford beat Canelo Alvarez for the undisputed super middleweight title earlier on this year.
Thank you very much. My highlight is obviously sitting here with you all for what is going to be a fabulous conversation. We all know that hiring talent is the ultimate game changer for our clients, and a lot of our listeners will be, I'm sure, scribbling down lots of notes throughout this conversation, because you are all brilliant at what you do and all come from interesting, broad backgrounds and have different perspectives. So I'm super excited to dig into this. We're going to start by looking back at kind of 2025 in the round, and we've seen some pretty big shifts, I think, when it comes to how companies are hiring and building teams. So I'd love to know what your biggest observations have been when it comes to those sorts of shifts. So maybe we'll start with you, James.
We saw a big adoption of kind of AI-related tools in talent acquisition throughout 2024, and we've definitely seen a move away from some of those tools throughout 2025. And I think that's also been reflected at some of our clients in how they've thought about hiring their teams. For example, the BDR, the SDR role, we saw a big shift towards companies assuming they could do more with less and looking to sequence and do a lot of outreach through tools. And actually what we're seeing towards the end of 2025 is a return to the hand cranking, the more manual approach to BDR and SDR, which is that people buy from people. And so there's been a real spike in that hiring.
Similar theme. I think companies are becoming and really focusing on being as lean as they can, with as many people in the org having a hands-on role. So even senior leaders are very hands-on in the teams that they're managing. I think, Zach, I might be stealing your words here, but people operating more as like player coaches. I don't know if it's just a shift from kind of last year, but definitely I think a shift over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think I'm seeing that reflected in the kinds of senior hiring we're doing as well. Seeing some really interesting searches come through for GMs of new categories, new countries, and a lot of these roles are huge opportunities for senior leaders who want to get back to really building things from the ground up within maybe, particularly for later stage companies within a more established context, and giving people who have, maybe moved on in terms of leadership in their careers an opportunity to go back and really, say that word. We're going to keep saying the words player coach, I think, but give that opportunity to really open stuff and build stuff by themselves and then build up a new team around them and have almost a mini CEO type role.
I echo much of this sentiment on the player coach call out. I think there's been a kind of the coming together of two trends. One is around AI tooling. While it might not be super effective in the SDR, BDR world, I think it is still making people marginally more productive and being able to do a bit more with less. There's that trend, and then that's come together with interest rates going up significantly after the ZERP period during COVID, money becoming more expensive, and therefore companies having to get a bit more fit, a match fit with respect to their headcount. So that's created an expectation that employees have to be more productive, and therefore senior leaders have to be a bit more in the weeds, as well as being able to operate at the strategic level.
Well, I think that's a good point, Zach. I worked in a fund, and one of the interesting things about being in a fund is up until a few years ago, it felt like the era of free money. Crazy valuations, like growth at all costs was the kind of mentality because it was funding round to funding round to funding round. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a shift to a model that actually your runway has to extend for as long as possible because there's not as much money flowing around in the ecosystem, but also to a degree, the investment thesis has changed for a lot of funds. So people that were finding it very easy to raise before perhaps aren't now. So there's definitely been a shift in how the money is being apportioned and what is being spent from a venture perspective.
What are some of the most common mistakes you will see founders make when it comes to approaching hiring? We'd love to make sure our listeners that maybe first-time founders are learning from the things we've seen, in my case, have probably made. So, Sophie, I guess given you're working day-to-day with some of the best founders out there on executive hiring, what sorts of mistakes have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the joy of what we do is that I'm working with some of the best companies and, as you say, the best founders out there. But I think the mistake I see them often making is because this is, these are some of the top companies, assuming that the top talent won't have other options and that they don't need to still be selling the opportunity throughout the process. Hiring processes are very much a two-way street. And where I see founders often fall down is because they're so embedded in the day-to-day of their business and they know it and they love it and they're passionate about it. They assume that everyone will naturally have that passion as well, whereas there has to be a bit more of a conversation and a sell as the process goes on.
Yeah, just to expand on that point, actually, I think that as companies go on their growth trajectory, the way that a company approaches hiring will inevitably change. So, the kind of person that you're looking for, the kind of involvement that the CEO or the founder might have, the way that you're scoring and assessing skills and behaviors will change and develop. Like the bigger the company, the more likely that you're going to need specialists versus in the early days, the more likely you're going to need a very broad skill set. And it's more about the kind of behaviors and the buy-in. So I think one of the things that I'm conscious of coaching our founders to think about is actually how do you need to adapt your hiring approach to suit the stage of your company, not just assume that what got you from 0 to 1 is going to get you from 1 to 10 and certainly not from there from 10 to 100.
And I think that also speaks to another big point I see, which is not making assumptions about what is needed at any given stage, or assuming that everyone internally, like all the key stakeholders, have the same idea of what you're looking for. And the hires I see fall down the most often are where there's not alignment internally, and then there's not alignment with your talent partner or your search partner. But it has to start with that internal alignment. And especially if you've just gone through a funding round, or you've grown significantly, it might look very different from what hiring looked like 6 months ago. So at the start of each key hire, really taking that time to work out what this hire is, why are you making this hire? Why are you making this hire now? And what does good actually look like? And conversely, what does bad look like? And it means that when you start actually speaking to candidates, it's a slicker process. It's quicker for you on the client side of things, and it creates a much better candidate experience as well.
Completely agree with that. It's such an off-putting thing to candidates who, have gone through a process with what they think is a very clear view of the opportunity, and then an interview comes at it from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Sophie said, I think and this is particularly true in hiring senior fractional and interim executives, just ensuring that the work has been done to sufficiently map out that hire, and a bit more specific, looking at what are the jobs to be done for this individual, what is the budget, both for their compensation package and potentially the budget that they're going to be able to manage, and what is the interview plan, who will be involved from the business's side, how will we assess that candidate's ability to problem solve the particular problems relevant to the job that they'll be doing, and just the downside of not going through that process is so great that even if it takes time, quite a bit of time and thought and effort to go through that, it is far worthwhile. The consequences of mishires are very high and expensive.
There is a belief that I think we all hold. When I say all, I mean all in the kind of professional world. Like, everyone assumes they're a really good interviewer, everyone assumes they're a really good hiring manager, and assumes they know what they need. And actually, one of the big things that I find myself saying to founders, particularly in earlier stage businesses, is that don't hire people who look and sound and act like you. You need to hire people that plug your gaps. And actually, I've worked with founders before who have come from perhaps McKinsey or a Bain, and they say, well, actually, yeah, this is the kind of person I want. I want lots of other people who've come from that same background. You've got that covered. Like, you've got that skill set. What you need is somebody that comes from perhaps a different demographic, or comes from a different educational background, or it's got different work experience, particularly if it's a vocational or practical application of a skill in the company that you're hiring for.
Being super, super clear on, from the candidate standpoint, what they can expect. So founders are excellent at selling the dream, going back to what Sophie was saying about being so bought in, obviously, to the mission, to the culture, what's being built. And so they're excellent at selling the dream to a candidate during the process and getting candidates super engaged and excited. I think, but potentially where we see people fall down is not being as maybe realistic about some of the practicalities and realities of the world and the role that the candidate is stepping into. So the more open and honest and transparent about the stage that the business is in, and the number of processes that have already been established, or the ones that will need to be established, I think the more that you can do that, the more obviously we see candidates being able to be successful when they get there.
It's honestly a huge mistake to try and cover things up that are going to come out instantly from the minute somebody lands in the job. But I think you'll get a lot more respect from candidates by being open and honest about the realities, and actually that's often a bigger opportunity than people think, because it actually is an exciting, you're hiring in an executive to help transform and turbocharge the growth of a business. They're going to expect a meaty job. So the fact things aren't all perfect, that's not a problem. The right candidates often see that as a challenge and an opportunity. So I think that's a really, really great point. Agree with everything. One thing I just wanted to add on to the interviewing piece is that it's amazing how many times candidates will have like 5, 6, 7 loads of interviews, and they're all basically the same interview. They're all asking the same things, and that's a common mistake. It's really important to make sure you have different people testing for different competencies and skills, or so that you're getting a well-rounded view, not just the kind of vibe check interview that I sometimes feels like everyone does the same thing. You don't actually dig any deeper, and I think that's really important. So coming on to 2026 then, would love to hear what the biggest priorities are that you're seeing that founders and talent leaders are going to be thinking about in the new year.
Yeah, with a lot of VC money going towards companies that have AI at the end of their title, there's a real kind of competition at the moment to hire a certain type of person for a certain type of role, right? So engineering, anybody that can put LLM or AI in their CV somewhere is likely to be able to command a far higher salary. But what I would always advise founders in those times is, yes, there's something attractive about the back, like the brands that they might have worked for previously. Yes, there might be something attractive about the kind of projects or programs they've worked on, but make sure it's applicable to what you're actually hiring. Like, if you're not building those kind of core products, don't hire people with that experience. Don't insist on it, because you find yourself in a bidding war with the kind of people that will have deeper pockets than you. And then it means that it's very easy for founders and for delivery teams to fall behind on what they actually need to ship, because they're chasing a kind of ego hire, not actually someone who's going to solve the problems that they have in the next 3, 6, and 12 months. So I think it probably ties into what Sophie was saying before, but it's like, be really disciplined about the problems that you're trying to solve and how you're going to measure the outcomes of those, and then make sure you're hiring people who can actually fix that problem, not people whose CV would look good if you displayed it on your employee team page.
I think what's interesting that I see at the leadership kind of C-suite hiring level is, and we'll definitely get on to talking about this more. I think AI is going to come up again and again in every question. But like, how much hasn't changed in some ways about leadership hires? We see companies, VC funding, I think, is going to be absolutely turned completely on its head by AI native companies who are raising so quickly and are so well capitalized at such early stages. And so often what we would hear from founders previously is, well, we'd love to see someone who's gone from series A to C or X headcount to Y headcount. And I think that that's not going to be a priority in the same way as we go into 26, as things rapidly change. But what will remain the same is, particularly on the COO side of things, you will still need senior leaders who can just come in, make stuff happen, get all the fundamentals in place, rally a team, and just make sure stuff is working. And if I think about some of the things I see coming down the pipeline here at JBM, I'm seeing those kinds of senior operational leaders become a priority as we go into the end of this year and the beginning of next. And so I think it's almost to say more of the same. I don't think huge amounts are going to change in terms of the kinds of senior leaders that people are looking for. You still want highly competent, experienced operational leaders who can make stuff happen, no matter what your organization looks like.
Yeah, on the fractional side, we've seen a massive influx, especially towards the back end of this year, in go-to-market roles, and I think, this is an old truth, but remains the case today, that having a fantastic product is one thing and is great, but you don't have a business unless you can get it into the hands of users and customers. So building incredible distribution networks is essential. So we've seen a lot of founders bring in specialist fractional marketers to help build those go-to-market engines, especially where there's a new product or a pivot in the business model from B2B to B2C, for example, and therefore the existing marketing team doesn't necessarily have that experience of building for that channel. So bringing someone in on a fractional basis to help build that strategy, and then hand it back over to the team to execute on, is something that we've seen founders focus on and prioritize.
I think you can now sit in communities and breakfast meetings, and sometimes 75 or 80% of the people that are at those tables are fractional and spending time with multiple different businesses, sharing ideas. So I think the rise of communities is going to continue, because we've been so digital and everyone wants to get back out and actually meet people and network and learn from one another, especially when they're running or managing lean teams with fewer resources. The more you kind of know and the more you can learn from your community, I think the better people are able to operate in those leaner environments. So rising kind of communities. And then I would just add that what I hope, and I am seeing, but I can hope it's going to continue, is people focusing on their employer brand and being a really good employer, somewhere where people want to work, and having that message go out into the market. There's been a lot of obviously frustration, I think, from people maybe not getting good candidate experiences with the reduction in talent teams over the last few years. So hopefully seeing a rise back in focusing on the people side and the hiring side of bringing people in.
And I guess what may have worked historically might not work so well in 2026 when it comes to actually attracting talent with, I guess, potentially candidates, just different channels, different opportunities, different things that candidates are looking for. So what do you see as the future when it comes to talent attraction? And is there anything that we can pass on to our listeners?
Yeah, I think there was probably a golden period of time in the early days of LLMs where you could get away with AI slop on your employer branding, on your JD, or on the candidate side, in your application, your resume, your outreach message, your cover letter, and the kind of receiver of that would be thinking, "Wow, this person has an incredible vocabulary, and they know how to use an M dash." um, Hire them immediately. They must be highly intelligent. But with the popularity of these tools just absolutely skyrocketing, it's now so evident when effort hasn't been put in. It's not to say that LLMs shouldn't be used in these processes on both sides. Certainly they should, but the inputs, the data has to be well thought out to ensure that the output is relevant and compelling.
You can spot the AI cover letter a mile off, and it really is starting to grate. I want personality. I want the human. I want authenticity. I'm not interested in a robot. And although the tools are brilliant and helping us in many ways, they're also, I think if you're too reliant on them, I think you'll come a cropper in this new era.
I think the use of AI and how it's used in your talent attraction and talent acquisition process can potentially differentiate companies. So if you're utilizing it in a way that makes your talent team better able to spend time with people, if it's improving, your speed of communication, and so you're able to keep people updated as to, the stage that they're in the process, then that's a win, rather than using it as kind of that frontline screening application that I think people are a little bit worried about, that there isn't a human reviewing their CV when it comes into an ATS. I'm seeing it obviously at Fixer, where I'm lucky enough to be on site with them, and the Fixer draft functionality to draft my emails to my candidates and let them know updates on where we are is just honestly life-saving as a recruiter who has never got out of a buried inbox. So hopefully we're improving the candidate experience, but not utilizing it as a replacement for a human, but just to aid in our ways of working.
One of the other things I've noticed is, particularly with some of these hyper-growth AI companies that scaling incredibly fast, there's a real speed of process that is sort of, a lot of these processes that are being turbocharged now. But despite that, I still think there is, particularly when it comes to senior hires, there is still a really important point about spending enough time in person with individuals. And we're seeing this with some of our exec search at the moment. The clients that are, it's super competitive for elite talent that will have multiple options. But if it's a COO search, the ones that I think are closing the candidates are the ones that are spending. It doesn't need to be 1,000 of interviews, but it's the little touch points throughout a process, the little personal connections, the quick debrief and coffee after an interview, the dinner at the end of a process to connect on a deeper level and really test chemistry and motivation, but also be vulnerable and open and, help sell the dream. The postcard thank you, the personalized thank you. I've heard on the podcast somebody sending a board game to a candidate at the end of a process because they'd heard that their family loved board games. There are little things you can do that help you stand out from the crowd. And I think in an AI world, don't forget the importance of those little touch points, those little personalizations that make people feel good. And I think it will make a big difference. We want to move on to talking about fractional hiring. We've already touched upon it, but it's obviously a huge evolution in the past few years, something that we've leaned into heavily, both through foundation partners and JBM SOS. So we'd love to see how you're seeing it evolving and how you think 2026 will sort of, how companies will lean more into that and leverage it to good effect. So James, do you mind sharing your perspective from a foundation partners angle?
Yeah, I think fractional hiring has sort of come hand in hand with the gig economy, and people at all different levels in organizations being able to engage on a shorter term basis. It's incredibly useful for smaller, earlier stage businesses that don't want to commit to a massive salary on their books for the next 12, 24, 36 months, but need some very highly specialized guidance. Lisa's talked earlier about how teams can do more with less, and The advantage of that is that businesses can move quicker and there's less kind of overhead. The disadvantage is that there's still a limit to the amount of knowledge that comes from tooling versus having the scars on your back. And that's one of the things that about senior fractional hiring that I'm a real champion of in the clients that I work with. Is like they're experts for a reason. So bring them in and let them do their expert bit, and then they can move on to somewhere else. And I think there's a certain type of person, a certain type of employee who enjoys that, who enjoys working multiple clients concurrently and having different touch points in different businesses at different stages of their growth trajectory. Yeah, big fan of Fractional and a big fan of the problems it solves for companies that have a very clearly defined piece of expertise that they need to get them from A to B.
Zach, in terms of maybe bringing to life a bit more about JBM SOS, like there may be founders and hiring managers listening to this thinking, okay, maybe it is time to consider the fractional route. So what would be your advice to them? What are some of the additional benefits or the watch outs, things they need to consider as to why it may or may not be the right option?
I think the headline for fractional hiring is consider it as a more dynamic way to match the supply of talent to the demand your organization has for talent. When you're hiring a full-time permanent executive, you're locked into having that person and paying for that person 5 days a week for an indefinite period. With a fractional executive, you can scale them up from 1 day to 5 days and back down to 1 as and when required. And you can end the contract when you want to within the notice period. So that creates a much more effective way to manage cost. But it's not always about cost either. There are specific instances where hiring fractionally makes a lot of sense and some where it doesn't make sense. I think, for example, where there is a short to medium term outcome-driven project, that's when a fractional executive is a perfect fit. We've recently worked with a business that was pivoting from a retail-only distribution channel to a direct-to-consumer digital marketplace product. And they didn't have that skill set to build that marketing strategy internally. So they brought in a fractional marketing executive to help them with that journey. They'll build out that strategy and then hand it back to the team to execute on that. Another really great example of where fractional works is when companies have potentially been burnt by hiring full-time permanent execs. They still need to hire someone full-time, but you can use fractional as a way to try before you buy. And the final, more general advice around when to hire fractionally is when you need high caliber expertise, but you simply don't need it 5 days a week. Where it doesn't work, roles requiring 24/7 ownership and indefinite continuity of work. That's when your core full-time permanent employee should come into play.
Thanks very much. And yeah, the try before you buy one it's been such a game changer for so many of JBM's clients. You know, I'd probably say it's been maybe well over 50% of the SOS placements we've made have converted perm. Who doesn't like to have to sort of do a taster of wine? If you like it, brilliant, get a bottle. If you don't, crack on to the next. Like it's a game changer. And the impact that you can get from doing that can be exponential. And particularly when you're able to acquire talent that you would never be able to necessarily hire on a full-time basis. We've seen some great examples of getting in a really high quality operator 2 days a week, 3 days a week. They then have such an immediate impact in the business, drive significant change. They get to their next, funding round, and then all of a sudden they can hire them full time, and they've built the conviction from both sides. They've got to know each other. It's effectively an extended interview process. There's so many benefits to it. This is something I definitely recommend anyone who's maybe been a bit skeptical to explore. It's a really good option to have alongside other options. We can't really talk about trends in talent and just the world at the moment without covering AI in a bit more detail. And I'd particularly like to see how you're all seeing AI evolve in the hiring space. Now, we've talked a little bit about the tooling and stuff, but Sophie, from an exec search perspective, would be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the challenge for executive search has always been how do you balance speed and rigor? These are such game-changing hires that companies are making, and they want to know that they are absolutely finding the best person out there. So for us, it's about, okay, well, how do we leverage the best of the tools that are out there? And Lisa touched on some of the kind of great use cases for how we can be utilizing it. But it's also about balancing that with really upskilling and training our associate team to make them the best researchers they can be. There's some great tools out there, particularly as someone who has always struggled to write notes while talking. It's really nice to be able to have some, a note taker in my meetings to be able to really focus on building the candidate relationships. And there are some great tools out there that are supporting on sourcing. So that's how I'm seeing it right now. I'm very open and excited about what the future of AI can look like in executive search. And I think there are, as I say, lots of cool tools out there that are nearly there. And, part of our job is to make sure we're watching how those things develop and staying on top of them and, using them where we can. But I think there's no replacement, certainly on the exec search side of things, for human connection, human knowledge, and the ability to assess those things like culture fit that aren't as easy for an AI to kind of assess and compare and contrast.
I think AI tools that are helping take away the administrative burden. I think everybody, obviously, who's been in the talent space or in the HR space knows how admin heavy it can be and time consuming to do some of the processes that we need to do to bring people into an organization. So the tools that are helping us to be able to do that and to be able to spend more time in the places where that human connection and the skills and experience that we all have and where that really adds value. I think that's where the exciting kind of movement in the AI space is.
Something a little provocative that I will say, over the last couple of years, a lot of the tools that I've seen pop up, AI specific for recruitment, focus on treating the symptom, not the cause of a problem. So, for example, I saw this really cool tool which masks people's voices so that you can do telephone interviews free from bias without making assumptions about the individual based on the biases in hearing their voice. But actually, that doesn't get to the heart of the problem, which is that fundamentally people can still be biased when they're going through a hiring process, and they can still be biased when they're employing people and when they're operating as their managers and stuff. So I think there's been a push towards lots of tools that are supposed to correct bad behaviors without actually addressing the fact that the bad behaviors exist at a fundamental level. So I think it'll be interesting to see how some of those tools survive and thrive, particularly in the current climate where lots of businesses and lots of venture capital firms care less about some of the DEI initiatives, the ESG initiatives that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, in a post Me Too era and post Black Lives Matter era, things that mattered more than they seem to at the moment, where everyone seems to just be chasing those crazy high valuations and those next big funding rounds.
AI can often be kind of touted as a solution to these issues. The reality is AI's still got humans behind it, and as we've seen time and time again, can still have human biases embedded in it. So as you say, I think we almost need to get back to the human fundamentals and work out what's, how do we move forward and use these tools, but still kind of think about our fallibilities in the same way as recruiters.
As we look forward, there's going to be some exciting hiring. I know there's, depending on who you talk to, you hear mixed things, but what we're certainly seeing from a JBM perspective, the sorts of clients we work with, there's a lot happening. There's a lot in the market, and I want to give people confidence that there's money being deployed into companies. There's definitely hiring being made. Obviously, if you're an AI company, that is a bit of a given, it seems, at the moment, but there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. So as companies look to scale in 2026, what advice can you all share as we head into the new year for any founders thinking about turbocharging the teams?
If you want to turbocharge your team, get the fundamentals right. Like, the employee journey doesn't finish on the day that an applicant starts. It starts on the day that the applicant starts, right? So there needs to be some consistency in the thinking around, why does a job exist in the first place? Like, what are the problems it exists to solve? How are you going to measure the impact of the person coming in to solve those problems? And then tracking that thinking right the way through the employee journey as people join and they come on and they stay with you. Because one of the biggest wastes of time and one of the biggest cost drains on businesses is hiring the wrong people for the wrong role and them staying with your company for far too long. And I think that people assume the solution is fire quickly. Well, actually, the solution is invest the right amount of time at the start of the process to track why you're hiring these positions, what the problems are they're going to solve, and how you're going to measure how effective someone is in that role, because that informs everything else. How you write the job spec, how you conduct the interview, how you onboard them, how you measure their probation. Like, it's that whole employee experience starts with that talent acquisition piece.
I think for me, it's really think about your employer brand. I think going back to what we were talking about around mistakes I sometimes see founders make, it's that they assume that leaders at a certain level won't be looking at Glassdoor or won't be asking around and kind of thinking about what the culture looks like. So really, there are some amazing companies out there who have horror stories in terms of candidate experience for recruiting. And so creating a really strong, rigorous, but mutual candidate experience can really make you stand out in the market, and being somewhere that people have a great experience. I think always remembering that your hiring needs are going to change constantly as a fast-growing business. So you might meet someone today who's not quite right for the role, but ensuring they have a really strong, positive experience means that they can absolutely come back in 6 months and a year, and think of it as a relationship building exercise as much as filling a specific need.
It has been, despite all the kind of excitement around companies hiring, that there is going to be a lot of opportunity. We also know it's been a very tough market. AI has also disrupted a number of jobs. We know a lot of startups have not sort of made it to the next round of funding. So be remiss of us not to think about that and try to support anyone that's on the job market at the moment. So have you got any sort of golden nuggets of tips and wisdom from all your experience of helping candidates get jobs as people start to think about new roles in the new year? How can candidates really stand out from a very crowded marketplace and really sort of land those amazing jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I share this advice as not just someone who's worked on the hiring side, but as someone who's been a candidate as well, especially someone who's moved across the world into a new geo where my networks haven't been as deep. So yeah, my three core pieces of advice for standing out and for making this journey easier is deep intentional networking, because building trust, and having the opportunity to show a bit more of yourself than what you can put into an online application really, really goes a long way. The second would be showing evidence, not adjectives, in your applications. Anyone can write adjectives, especially with the advent of LLMs and how often they're used, but show us the data. And the third one, which I think is really important, is search deep and hard for what is that special link between you and the company that you're applying for. And that might be around a particular passion and interest that you have for their space. It might be about previous work experience that really closely aligns, or just a personal connection to the cause or to their mission. If you think long and hard enough, you can probably find a little link between you and most companies out there, and really try and play on that and bring that to the fore.
Suitability for the company is one thing, but suitability for the role is something else. There's statistics which I'm going to butcher, but a man will apply for a job if he matches 30% of the job profile. A woman will only apply if she matches 80 to 90%. So I think, men, come on, let's be a bit realistic. Are you actually suitable for some of these jobs that you're applying for? Women, come on, let's be a bit more positive. You're probably better at these jobs than most of the men that are applying for them. So I think there's something about suitability for a role, particularly if you've been out of work for a long time. And I know that this is a behavior that I've had myself. In my desperation to find something, I've applied for things that I'm just not suitable for. And actually, the impact of that is that I feel like my numbers, my success rate is far worse than it actually is, because I've put myself in contention for things that I'm not suitable for. So I think there's something about being really honest with ourselves about where the opportunities actually exist, and putting ourselves forward, particularly on the female side, if we're not that suitable.
I think showing your adaptability, obviously how you've stayed up to date with trends, you really know what's going on in the world at the moment, which sounds so obvious, but you know what's going on in the industries that you're applying for, in the specific companies, the size of companies that you're applying for, and how you can really add value. So I think being able to show that you're flexible, adaptable, and just really have a solid understanding of how you are there to solve the jobs to be done for the company that you're speaking to, and demonstrate that you can get there quick. You can ramp up quickly within kind of 30, 60, 90. You could be delivering, XYZ. Having a real clear understanding of that and being able to articulate that, I think, is super, super important.
I love Lisa's point there. And whenever I'm advising candidates about what to put on their CV, I push them towards numbers. Like, what metrics can you introduce to prove that you've delivered something, whether it's an operational efficiency, whether it's a revenue number, whether you've reduced spend, whatever it is, find ways to actually prove the claims that you're making about yourself. Because a lot of the time when we're reviewing CVs, it's the first thing I look for when I'm scanning through a CV is like, what numbers are on there? What proof point exists on the CV?
I always talk to candidates about it being, one, succinct and to the point, and two, show what you personally have been accountable for. What have you delivered? What's the size of the team? What's the revenues you owned? What, just get into the crunchy detail and help me. Because if you think about all the thousands of people applying for roles, if you're going to make it difficult, one, if it's not easy on the eye, if it's really convoluted and there's too much information, you need to make it as easy as possible for that hiring manager to see what you are and hit them between the eyes with it, why they should keep reading and why they should get you for an interview. And so really spending the time on getting that shop window right from a CV perspective and from a LinkedIn perspective is absolute table stakes. You have to do it. And that's the sort of thing that I'm very happy to chat to anyone about, but I have some quite strong opinions, and I think it will make a big difference in a world where people have got AI just spouting superlative language throughout their CV and LinkedIn. Just get to the crunchy detail.
Building relationships with recruiters is so imperative in a busy talent market, and don't underestimate how valuable it can be. We love, and just to give JBM a little shout out here, we love having those kinds of conversations where we help people work out what their next step is. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. And those kinds of relationships might turn into roles straight away. It might prompt something in our mind that we can talk to you about. But more than that, it can be a lonely process hunting for a job, and we know that. And it can just give you someone to talk it out with who gets it, understands it, and can give you guidance and advice. So reach out to the best recruiters you know, and then grab a coffee.
We're sadly at an end. We've got one final question. If you were to make one bold talent prediction for 2026, what would it be and why?
You won't see them at the Christmas party, but you will see AI employees on your org chart in 2026.
We've seen it a lot, haven't we? The AI agents cropping up all over org charts. So I think that's a pretty good and accurate one.
Similar to what I was saying earlier, I think employer brand is going to become even more important. I don't know how bold this is, but employer brand is going to be as much of a kind of a growth lever and influencer as some of your marketing channels that you're using.
Yeah, I think embedded talent is going to start to become a far more significant player in the recruitment ecosystem in the UK. I don't know what the percentages are at the moment, but I suspect you'll see a massive increase in this kind of longer term fractional engagement of talent partners over the traditional agency model or having people in-house.
I think I'm going to be eating my words about AI executive search researchers in a year. But that's why, as I say, it's our job to keep on top of that and work with them and not see them as competitors in what we do.
Thank you all so much. It's been a fantastic chat. Loads there to get stuck into and for our listeners to learn from. And I'm sure they will be very grateful for all of your brilliant wisdom and mentorship. So thank you for being here and sharing it with us today. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.